Hi, everyone. Thank you, wherever you are in the world, for joining the webinar today. It's actually a special occasion for us. It's our 10th webinar, a nice round number that we've been doing. So Graham and I, we started this, gosh, right around COVID, I think it was, that we started doing these webinars. So we've been running on pace for about 3 a year. This is number 10. You know, I have to say, we've gotten a great reception to this webinar series since inception. Our numbers have ranged anywhere from 400 plus signups to 1,000 plus signups, and we usually have a couple hundred people attending each of the sessions. So thank you for everybody who has made the time and who's making the time today to be part of our webinar, and especially to those who have consistently made. I don't know if anybody's made all 10, but again, special prize for anybody who has. Yep, so
it should be.
As always, we try and pick themes that are particularly relevant, particularly strategic to talk about based on a lot of the conversation that's going on in the procurement ecosystem in the community. And it's no different today. Our theme today is around driving successful procurement transformation. How do you unite goals, digitalization, and talent to make sure that that transformation is successful? And maybe just to add a little bit of context to the topic, when we think about the future of the procurement function, and when we think about what that ought to look like, I think we have a lot of consistency around the definition of what success looks like, right? So I think if we did a poll across the audience here and across the wider ecosystem, we'd all be aligned to say, yeah, you know what, a successful procurement transformation, successful organization looks like this, 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 and this. So I don't think we have a lot of divergence necessarily in that end state. But what I think should be clear to everybody is that the way it gets implemented from organization to organization tends to vary pretty materially, right? Those efforts tend to emphasize different things at different points in time. And our perspective is that perhaps one of the core issues that lead to a less than successful procurement transformation is a lack of focus on fundamentals, right? So when we talk about that transformation, we think of it in, we don't look at the fundamentals, across the board, and secondly, as an ecosystem, a sort of a system of sorts, where you have to consider multiple different things. So our perspective is, you cannot tackle that on its own. You really have to think through all of these aspects and knit them together consistently. And as a foundational aspect, there's sort of 3 key themes that we're going to talk about in this session, where there's sort of 3 core tenets that I think have to get understood before you can really drive forward on successful procurement transformation. We're going to touch on what those themes are in a second, but really they're focused around goals alignment, this idea of digital transformation and being part and parcel of procurement transformation, and then talent, which I think is in many ways an under-tackled area when it comes to procurement transformation. So we're going to touch on all of these topics. In order to have that conversation, we have an esteemed panel with us to take part in this conversation over the next 45 to 50 minutes or so, and then we'll do some Q&A. We'll try and fit some time in for Q&A. I'm not going to do the introduction. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves, but just quickly, we have Almeida from AkzoNobel. We have Anastasio Valenzuela, who is formerly of Chobani, who is joining us today. The inimitable Graham Crawshaw, as always, and myself, Omer Abdullah. So I'm going to let everybody do a quick introduction of themselves. Andre, if we could start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Omer. Well, my name is Andre Almeida. I'm the procurement director for Latin America in AkzoNobel. It's a paints and coatings industry. I have 20 years of experience in procurement in different segments, such as telecom, financial services, consulting, and also paints and coatings industry. So, and I had the privilege to be part of big projects on procurement transformation. I hope to share some of my experience today with everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andre. Anastasio, over to you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm basically an ex-Unilever, Chobani, a procurement professional with plus 20 years. went through a lot of different stages within procurement. Like I always say, I'm a graduate from Unilever University by Mark Engel, only the one. I went through a lot of different categories and portfolios, direct and indirect and so forth, and even did some consultancy on my own, and that's, restructuring some procurement organization in Dubai. I'm looking forward to, share my knowledge with you guys, and hopefully we'll have a good, productive discussion.
Thanks, Anastasio. Great to have you and Andre on the team. Graham?
Yeah, very briefly. Hi, I'm Graham Crawshaw, the Procurement Content Director at CASME, and I'm here to share the collective viewpoint of the CASME membership.
Great, and I'm Omer Abdullah. I'm one of the co-founders of the Smart Cube. We're a procurement intelligence and analytics organization, now part of the WNS organization as of the end of last year, and excited to be part of this discussion. So just to kick off, here's how we'll structure the conversation. As I said, we're going to do this in sort of 3 parts, and each part I'll tee it off with an idea, a tenet, call it a hypothesis, whatever you want to call it, of what is a critical pillar that drives successful procurement transformation. And I'll pose that, and then let's get into a little bit of a conversation around each of those. And just to give everybody a heads up, there's 3 core ideas that we're going to talk about today. Number 1, clarity on procurement's goals in an organization is of course paramount. But what's the balance between cost, innovation, risk, and stakeholder satisfaction? That's topic number 1 we'll cover. Spend about 10 minutes or so talking about that. And then the next 10 minutes, we'll talk a little bit about digital transformation. And that is digital transformation, we talk a lot about it these days, it's in fashion, but it tends to get talked about separately, right? As in digital transformation versus procurement transformation. And the tenet that I'd like to suggest here is digital transformation is part and parcel of procurement transformation. It is the essential enabler, but it is an integrated element, and you can't separate the 2 ideas, right? So that's the second piece, and we'll dive into that. And then last but not least, talent has to be front and center in the transformation agenda. And if we don't rethink our talent needs today, we will not succeed. And so that's the third element that we're going to dive into as we talk about it. So just to give everybody sort of a heads up as to the 3 topics we're going to tackle, we're going to go through each of those. And let's dive right in as we begin with the first one. But before we talk about the very first one, let's start off at Graham. I believe we have a poll, a series of polls that we're going to run. So let's kick off the first poll.
Excellent. So we have got the first poll. It's great to always get this input from everyone. So what do you consider to be the biggest challenge in achieving procurement transformation in your organization? So please select one of the choices. The lack of support from the executive team, limited budget and resources, resistance to change from stakeholders, inadequate technology infrastructure, skills gap in the procurement team. And we've also got another. So if there is something else, then just tick other and put that in the chat, and we'll look to pick that up. So we're really looking, what do you see as the biggest challenge that is necessary to overcome in order to achieve procurement transformation? So delighted to have we've got about 160 people on the call at this moment. Delighted that you are responding so quickly. Just give it a few more seconds. Really understand, what do you see as the biggest challenge? And with all our polls, it's your personal viewpoint that we're looking for. So your knowledge from working in your organization. Excellent. I'm going to end the poll there and share the results. So you've selected one, so the percentages work. So the largest one is that resistance to change from stakeholders. So 36% of you have said that. Then limited budget resources, 26%. Then we drop down to the skills gap in the procurement team. So how fascinating are the things that we're going to talk about today are those that you've agreed and put in the poll responses.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Andre, Anastasio, maybe Andre, will start with you. Thoughts, comments on the results of that poll?
Well, no surprise, right? I think that at the end of the day, resistance to change is a leading factor for why transformations fail, right? It's quite, I would say that um, around a third of the stakeholders, they do not understand why changes happen, right? So it's very important that you make them understand why you're doing the change, why the change is important to the enterprise, what are the benefits, and not only for the enterprise, but also for the stakeholders. So that's a key success factor to implement change, right? So communication is the key here, is a key factor, and it's really important that people understand what's happening.
Yeah, I think that comfort level is really critical. Anastasio, resonates with you?
Yeah, I can build up on Andre. We have to go back to the basics. I mean, typically when we do a transformation in an entity like procurement, it's part of a whole collective corporate transformation. It's a process, and with this corporate operation type of activity, it has to go to the strategic goals of the organization. So like we say, gravity, as Newton said, the apple coming down comes down. So we should have those strategic goals comes up from part of the corporate structure. And then procurement is not an island, like I said, it's just part of a whole big ecosystem, as you mentioned, Abdullah, and Omer at the beginning. So this is a critical path that we really need to think. As Andres said, it should be a collective thing. And I think stakeholders or leadership, or whether executive leadership or leadership in the organization, they miss this in the midst of things, like put their head into kind of an ostrich into the sand, and they forget what's happening. And I think it's important always from the executive leadership to remind the organization at all levels that this is part of the whole collective thing. Again, it's a business model, and it should be part of an organizational structure. It should be part of a whole culture, kickoff culture that I think organizations forget about it. And if we don't have those three elements together, kind of like the jigsaw on a wall, then you won't have successful change management, which is a critical path.
So I think I 100% agree with that. And I think that change piece of it and the communications pieces of it are critical, and it has to cascade down appropriately. The interesting thing in that poll, and it's good to see, is that lack of executive support was not a prime issue, which I suspect if we did this poll maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, probably might have had a little bit of a different balance on some of these answers. But so let's start with that specific point. And we're gonna, on this change point, we're gonna come back to it in the third issue that we're tackling around talent, because I think it's part and parcel of that. But let's start with that first point around executive support and setting the goals in terms of what's there. So the first tenet that we're going to talk about is clarity on procurement's goals in an organization is paramount. What is the balance between cost, innovation, risk, and stakeholder satisfaction? Now, there may be other goals as well, but those are kind of the prime ones we tend to hear a lot about. It's clear that executive support is there for transformation. It's clear that we have to move in a particular direction, right? Mm. But how do you balance between these competing points around cost and innovation and risk and stakeholder satisfaction? How do you make these trade-offs, and how do you build the case for like cost? I don't think anybody argues, right? I mean, everybody says procurement cost makes perfect sense. We got to go after that. But how do you make these trade-offs of investing in specific areas, focusing on things like innovation, focusing on things like risk mitigation, focusing on aspects of stakeholder or customer satisfaction, serving the BUs, for example, really well? So I guess thoughts on that, Anastasio, maybe if you can kick us off on that point, but how do you sort of think about that issue?
So first of all, we lead from the back, not from the front. As leaders, and leadership should be always in the back of the team. So, and pushing, being part one of many, not in the contrary, like, pulling the team, as we know. So with this said, like I said, go back to the change management. So important, because that's where resilience comes in an organization. When we talk about, cost, total cost of ownership, efficiency improvement, agility, risk management. All these are part of the attributes of resilience of a culture. So, when we do something like this and transformation, we need to go to the ABC, alphabet and work on those elements from the get-go. If we don't do this, we're going to have like Andre said earlier, things are going to fall apart. And a lot of organizations, it's ironic how organizations could be like 100 years old or 50 years old or 20 or multi-billion dollars, whatever it is, but they get stupid in the beginning or in the middle of that process because they lose sight. And I think it's very important to always have this 2,000 miles or kilometers above and keep seeing things, all the piano strokes are in harmony.
Yeah.
And that's what we're missing in a lot of organization. And I remember from Unilever time until Mark Engel came on board and he did the revolution within Unilever. It was amazing how he took the corporate structure, strategy, and goals, and he was able to funnel it down. And we were like, I remember 2,000 employees within the procurement organization at that time. It's a lot. And he was actively there in every single, quarter or every 6 months or 5 months, walking around, talking about leading from the back, and people, you hold example of your leadership that way. And before him, I remember, we didn't know. We just get something, like a big, nice logo, whatever. We're gonna kick off the year, and then that's it. So these are important element and factors to bring about when we do the kind of transformation like this.
Yeah, that's a great point around starting with the corporate strategy and driving that down. So when we think about trade-offs, and for example, if you're a CPG company and you want to focus on driving greater customer satisfaction and innovation, that's a particular set of goals. Not only costs, but a broader set of goals, not minimizing cost whatsoever, but there's a broader set of objectives that are there. So I like that idea of cascading down. Andre, how does that sort of align kind of your space and how you've seen procurement teams operate?
Yeah, totally agree. Of course, that you have to tie your procurement strategy to the corporate strategy, right? But regarding all those elements that you brought, I think that it's a matter of finding the right people to deal with each element that you're talking about. So risk, stakeholder satisfaction, innovation. So you gotta have a team that is prepared to deal with each one of these elements, right? And also you have to make them specialized on specific elements. So for example, risk, that's something that is getting more and more critical, especially I think after COVID, that we saw all the issues with the supply chain, with the supply chains all around the world. We ended up impacting our customer satisfactions, for example, because many companies were not able to deliver the goods or the services, right? And having people that are specialized on risk management, on connecting with stakeholders, understanding their needs, their desires, it's really critical that you have these people focused on that. Of course, cost, you have to have a procurement team that is able to understand the total cost of ownership, make versus buy, everything. But it's at the end of the day all about having the right people doing the right things, right? Yeah. And tackling each one of these elements.
Yeah, I mean, the people fact, yeah, and we're going to talk more about this certainly as we get to the talent piece of this. The people aspect is just so fundamental, right? If you can have the right people and organize them around the right set of goals and objectives, then I think success isn't a given, but it's a whole heck of a lot easier. Graham, from a CASME community perspective, are you seeing themes around this? Are you seeing some commonalities as to what folks are saying?
Definitely, we certainly are. I mean, I want to pick up on that sort of that alignment with business objectives. It's a throwaway statement, and you often hear it, people talk about it, but I think to me, the devil's in the detail. it's understanding. So I would always ask the question, well, as the procurement professional, have you got joint objectives for which you are both, you and the stakeholder, having the same target? Are you going to get your bonus payment because you achieve the targets that you've both been set? If the answer is yes, then that gets you aligned. If it's not a positive answer, then ultimately you've got your own direction you're going in. And I think it's about the detail. It's about ensuring that what you're trying to put forward as your demonstration of that alignment really is understanding the business and not just sort of using that phrase. So I think I'm seeing more organizations say, yeah, the bonus structure is linked. Procurement only gets its bonus if the business objectives are achieved. And likewise, the business has got that incentive to work with procurement. And whether it is about risk, bringing innovation, or any of those others, it's a joint connective piece of work that you're doing.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of these things, like, I would go to conferences and I hated using the phrase executive buy-in, executive support. It felt like a cliche. Why are we saying this? Of course we need executive support. And I think we're now sort of progressed now. I mean, I think it's always been the case, but I think we've sort of progressed beyond getting executive buy-in and using that statement to saying, okay, it's not just about buying, then it's about embedding that throughout, right? Through the goals, through the objectives, through the incentive mechanisms, and then communicating that down to people and making sure everybody's aligned. So I think that's a good call out in terms of what we're seeing. The other thing, of course, and that brings us to the second point that we're going to talk about, that is, of course, all the rage these days is digital, anything digital. And look, and rightly so. I think there's so much that's going on in the space from a digital perspective, and particularly in the recent past, when you now talk about generative AI and ChatGPT and all of these fun things, I think the future, when you embed these various digital enablers, let me just call them that, is actually pretty amazingly different. I mean, I know there's been people, who've been talking about in procurement circles that the procurement team of the next 10 years, in 10 years time, is going to look foundationally, fundamentally different than what it is today. Now, I think that's the case. It's absolutely going to be the case. But the interesting thing to me is I would have had a different answer to it maybe a few, 2, 3, 4 years ago, when digital was still a big deal, versus today with what we're seeing around generative AI and all of what's going on there. So I think it's super interesting, super exciting times. One of the problems that ends up happening there, I think, is that we tend to then talk about digital and digital transformation as a distinct standalone thing, right? Oh, I need to undertake digital transformation. But the reality is, I think it's part and parcel, right? It's procurement transformation at the end of the day. Why are we doing this? We're doing this to get better outcomes and better actions and better objectives, and ultimately fulfill the corporate goals. And so the next piece that let's talk about, we'll do another poll in just a second, but the next piece that we're going to dive into is that digital transformation is part and parcel of procurement transformation. It's the essential enabler, whether we make the entire investment today or we have a roadmap to get there. But the point is, it's part and parcel, it's not distinct, and we need to think of it that way. So that's the next piece we're going to dive into. But before we do, Graham, I believe we have poll number 2.
We've got poll number 2. So what are the top 3 ways that procurement transformation can benefit your organization? So you can select 3 this time. Give it some thought and let's see which are the top 3. So deliver greater strategic value based on data-driven intelligence and relevant insights. Improved productivity as the team can focus on tasks that add value to the business. Increased innovation by leveraging technology, market intelligence, and supplier collaboration. Greater cost savings achieved by reducing unnecessary spending and optimizing processes. Implementing better strategic sourcing strategies, etc. Then improved risk mitigation by being proactive and robust, higher compliance, better visibility, and greater control over procurement activities. We've packed an awful lot into this one questionnaire because we've also got other. So again, use the chat if you want to add any other comment to that. But just give you a few more seconds to answer some of that poll. Really give you thought. And actually, what's great about these polls, it gives you a bit of insight as to really what the options are, because you could probably tick them all, but we want to know really what are the top three, what's actually going on in procurement now. So thank you for using the options or the other option. Put that in the chat. We can all see those comments as well. I think we've given enough time, so thank you. Always a rush of responses to that point. We've got about 160 that are participating. So let me end the poll there. And my goodness, let me share the results here. Look at that. Don't look at the percentages because you've been able to answer more than one, but look at the length of the bars. They're all so similar. It's it's amazing that it's a real divide between them all. To be honest, I wouldn't say there's really a fundamental difference between any. Certainly of the top four within one or two individuals, they're all very nicely balanced.
And
what do we make of that?
The interesting thing here is you notice, and I appreciate the lines are reasonably close together, but cost savings doesn't come out as number one. Mm-hmm. Strategic value is now embedded in the mindset clearly, because that's the front runner, so to speak, that's there. Compliance and risk, of course, are important, but they're lesser down the priority list. Andre, Anastasio, thoughts, comments?
I mean, I think, you know, like back to your initial opening of that question about digitalization, we need to go into the premise of the whole concept. Digitalization is merely a tool. It's a catalyst. You know, if you look at back to I like to always go to the basics, and because history tells us always the future. I mean, you know, 18th century BC, that's when the first documented transaction happened with the Phoenicians between the two sides of the Mediterranean River, and then sea, and then we had the Silk Route and so forth. And it was always about people, and we had always different systems coming in. Now it's happened to be the AIs, the systems. So we don't need to lose sight of this, that, you know, we always have to look at the big picture. What are we about? What are we doing? Not only focusing, oh, we have this platform, we need to use this and this and that. We don't have resource. That's where people start losing the sight and leadership. And if you put things in context, things will follow. So it's always, we talked about, the first point came up 61%, as you said, strategic value. So it's the strategic vision that we need. And then from there, everything starts falling into place within procurement. And that's where you create the resilience of your strategy. Andre?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, interesting results. I was wondering what would the answers be like 10, 20 years ago when I started. And I think it would be mostly focused on savings, right? To generate savings, deliver savings. But technology has evolved so much. And I think that also the world has become much more competitive, that it obligated procurement to find, you know, and deliver other much more value and not only savings, right? So we have to, you see, there's so much on, I have just done a course on data analytics, and it's amazing how much this front has evolved over the last years, and how many people in procurement are prepared to talk to a data scientist. So that's so technology is allowing us to do so much, and we have to be prepared for all these changes, and they're coming very quick. Again, the world has become much more competitive, so it's not only about savings delivery. It's much more is how can we improve quality? How can we increase the customer satisfaction, and not internal customer, the external customer satisfaction? How can we increase the supply chain resilience. So it's much more than just savings, and it's really important to see that the priorities are changing, and technology and the digital transformation is allowing us to deliver much more than savings.
So on that, so just following on from that point then, as we sort of think about driving digital change, if I can use that term, implementation, as part of the broader procurement transformation agenda, I think what you've said makes sense. Is, in other words, put things in context, align the set of goals, and then find the right solutions that help you get there, right? How do you, at the same time, there's a lot of excitement, right, in the marketplace. There are tons of new companies coming up every single day, right? There's a lot of players. How do you sort of think about this in terms of, how do you avoid the latest fad? How do you sort of think about where to focus and where to put your time and energies? And I'm going to come back to the point on ROI in a second, so let's treat that separate. But just in terms of where to begin, if you have a set of procurement transformation goals, how do you decide from a digital agenda perspective, where should you focus and where should you put your time in? So either of you, Anastasio, you want to kick off?
Yeah, I think it's about the core competency of an organization. You cannot copy and answer, copycat and copy paste, you know what I mean? That's important, you know, because each organization is different type of persona. And therefore we have different strategies, different way. I mean, we won't have all the, you know, we have to grow resilience and innovation and everything, but to go about these paths, each organization is different, you know? So it's important to understand that we cannot copy and paste a solution. And that's what comes up in consulting companies. They can't do, you know, consulting company, they go to customer A and B and C and D, and they make cookie cutter solutions. And then they know from what A goes into B and to C, and then they come up with their own. That's why they always have the knowledge market, what's happening out there. So it's important not to copy, because otherwise you're gonna fall, you know, flat in your face as an organization. Yeah. You know, you need to understand your strengths and weaknesses, and do your own SWOT, and then you figure out exactly what can you do, because digitalization is a huge ample. I mean, especially now, you see a lot of different companies, the fair market, the Scout RFP and stuff. They're all coming up. They're you know, as Andre said, you know, it's becoming more competitive, more global, and everything. But at the same time, it's becoming a small village, the world. So we have to go back to the concept of the small shop in the corner of the street in the village, where you go to Joe Schmo there and to buy certain things and do your analytics. You know, I think go back to the simple concepts, and we'll figure out exactly what we want. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, Andre, your thoughts there?
Yeah, pretty much I agree with Anastasio. I think that we also have to be really understand the company strategy, right? The enterprise strategy. Where do we want to go as an organization? And again, how can procurement support and be an enabler of that strategy at the end of the day? So being connected to the strategy and really understand to each point of the strategy how we what we can do, how we as a procurement organization can contribute is key to be aligned with that.
Yeah, it's you know, it's an interesting point, and I think we can get. I love the idea of there's no copy and paste. It's a persona-based issue. It's unique. It's independent, and I think we can get caught up on, oh, so and so's done this and they've driven that value. That's what we should be doing. But that doesn't mean it's fit for purpose in the organization, and maybe not fit for purpose today, maybe fit for purpose down the road potentially. But Graham, how are you sort of, like, if we look at the CASME community, I mean, I'm presuming digital is a big topic. I'm presuming people are talking about that.
Yes.
How are folks sort of thinking about those trade-offs of where to focus and what specific areas to drive down?
And as you've almost hinted, I don't think there is one solution. I think it's a mix of all sorts of things. And in fact, I'm picking on Cindy's question where she says, what does digital transformational specifically mean to procurement? Well, again, that can mean different things to different organizations, but I say generally, it's looking at how you can do things within the procurement function by making it easier to be done, whether there is a system, whether it's introducing catalogs. It may not be the latest AI, it may still be down to effective punch-out catalogs. It may be having a contract repository, all these different ways that you can sort of make things more automated. So taking it each at a time, whether it's risk management, whether it's ESG, whichever it is, and having some ability to get the information, to get the data, to have visibility, and ideally get all that lot connected up in some shape or form. That's the really difficult piece. And I do know, even looking at spend analytics, and my goodness, Omer, we've spoken about that before, even now in 2023, that remains a massive task for large organizations that have got multiple branches, multiple currencies, lots of different supplier lists. So I think it is about how can you make those improvements? How can you add value in the process that you've got in procurement? And I'm going to throw in there, the majority of companies are going through this process. It's not something that you start and stop and say, yeah, I've done it. It's a constant change. And I think for me, what I'm seeing across the CASME community is almost every company is transforming, doing something, changing, whether it's revisiting the Center of Excellence responsibilities, whether it is looking to implement something to specifically help with diversity. And my message is simple. If you're not constantly changing, go to a company that is. And I think it's that clear cut on the importance of transformation at the moment.
So two things I just want to kind of touch on there. First off, just a side point on spend and spend analysis work. Not to date myself, but I've been in this space for about almost 30 years at this point. Andre, to your point of what things were like 10 to 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was cost and cost and cost. That was pretty much it, right? And it was funny to me, at the time, it amazed me that any organization didn't have a handle on their spend completely, right? It just amazed me. Of course, now, you know, I'm a little bit older now, so I understand that there's a lot of nuances and reasons for that. So that the lack of hair and wisdom sort of maybe has filtered through a little bit, but it's still the case today. So people are still grappling with that, and which is why we see so many solutions that are out there trying to solve this problem. That's the first point. The other point, and Graham, this is kind of the to the question on what is digital transformation. I'd even add to that, maybe a slightly, I don't know if folks think this is a more provocative view, but the other thing I'd add to it is digital transformation, ultimately as part of procurement transformation, is about driving better outcomes, right? Better outcomes for the organization. And by the way, what does that mean? That means that when we think about it, I don't think we only think about it in the procurement construct, right? In other words, there'll be some technologies that are put in place where procurement will ultimately say, you know what? You, the end user, the business unit, can drive all of this yourself. We might drive some of the consistency around policy, around structure, around ensuring total value, best cost of ownership, so to speak. But we're not going to be engaged in the process. We don't need to be. You can just drive it yourself. It's going to get done. Or the AI, so to speak, the supreme being, is going to take care of the process, and we don't need to get involved. So that's maybe the best outcome. So it's a bit of a mind shift, right? And I'm not suggesting folks aren't beginning to think about that, but it's a shift away from I need to build a team that looks like this to maybe I need a team to build that in these areas it looks like this, in these areas it looks like this, but in these areas is nothing, right? And it's pure tech that's driving the value, and that composite, that we're going to enable better outcomes at the end of the day. So to me, I sort of use that filter to drive that. So one other question I want to ask, and again, I'm mindful of time. We do this every single time. We never have enough time for these discussions. But one question that always comes up is ROI, right? Proving the ROI and ensuring that. Andre, maybe if we can start with you, how do you sort of think about this idea of ROI, particularly in the context of digital?
Well, of course, ROI will always come to, especially for procurement, right? There is always a balance between what we're going to deliver in terms of hard savings and soft savings, right? Of course, the digital, we always expect them to, the digital solutions to replace some of the work that is executed by people, right? And of course, that is a key component of the hard savings. But also we have the soft savings side that is, of course, much harder to defend, right? That is based on, we're going to have a more strategic team. We're going to have a team that has more time to, connect to the stakeholder, understand the stakeholder needs and expectations, and of course, not only deliver savings, right, but also deliver what the stakeholder wants. So that's the key, and that's a much more difficult discussion to have. How much savings are we going to be able to deliver? The soft savings, right, that will come in the future. That's a completely different discussion, right? So doing some benchmarks is a good way to defend that, right? Based on some benchmarks with other companies, how successful they were on delivering the soft savings. That's something that helps a lot in order to defend and estimate the value that you're going to bring in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Look, it's a tough question, right? I mean, this is why we grapple with it day in, day out. There's no simple answers. Anastasio, how do you sort of think about that, the benchmarks and driving ROI?
So I think you mentioned early on in the question, Omar, about this center of excellence. That's where everything falls into it. Once an organization have the center of excellence, that's where you define your ROI that will come as a key performance indicator, KPI. So as Andre said, there's savings, cost saving, cost reductions, and so forth, and then you're talking about the efficiency. Then we're talking about are we increasing agility? Are we increasing, controlling the risk mitigation? All these things within the ROI that they're going to be qualitative and quantitative. So it's important to put those things because, like we said, 20 years ago, Andre, you said everybody look at cost savings, productivity. And that was a very tactical approach when at that time transactional function. Now as end-to-end strategic, we need to have a better understanding of all that stuff.
Yeah, correct.
100%.
And the hard the hard savings, like the savings that you have on people, it's relatively easy, right, to calculate because you can
You froze.
Yeah, we lost Andre there.
calculate that. But the key challenge is okay, how much, what is beyond that in terms of having a more strategic procurement team that is able to deliver even more than we were used to deliver before.
Yeah, and I would like to add one more thing here into those elements of KPI, the culture. Are we creating resilient culture? Because a lot of consultants, they come in, like we said, they copycat and paste answers from different organizations and they put it in there and they will, once your culture is destroyed, it's like a family. Once the culture of the family is destroyed, it's very difficult to put them together.
Yeah.
About the ROI.
So that brings us neatly onto the third point around talent. And that is talent must be front and center in the transformation agenda. And if we don't rethink our talent needs, we're not going to succeed. Everything that we've talked about and everybody on this panel has talked to is the fact that talent has to be front and center in the process, and we have to think through it in detail. So I want to dive into that in just the time that we've got. But again, poll number 3, I think we have one more to go, Graham.
We certainly do. It's actually more about this wanting more information about procurement. So which fundamental concept of procurement transformation would you like to learn more about? And we've got some of the options here. So first of all, how to achieve clarity and alignment on procurement's goals in an organization, how to lay a solid foundation to enable digital transformation, how to train and empower talent to support procurement transformation, how to make the case for greater technology investments, and how to win over stakeholders who are skeptical of the value procurement can offer. So yeah, please just sort of respond to those, and you can respond to more than one there. So this is a bit of a lead in. Then we'll go back to the talent. Just give it a few more seconds.
We'll manage this in the time. Yeah, we'll manage this in the time we've got. This happens every single time. We try and leave 10 minutes for Q&A. We never have 10 minutes for Q&A. I apologize to the folks on the call, but.
Just whilst we are collecting that, I mean, Cindy, you're really pushing with the questions today, and I do like them. You say, what is procurement digitalization specifically? And I would answer that saying the digitalization is putting the system in place. Digital makes it sort of ones and zeros. So it's putting some form of computer-based technology, some system, whether it's an app, whether it's whatever it is, to actually make that whole process joined up and much more efficient. I think that's, I don't know if that's the ideal definition. Anyone else got a better definition of what we really do mean? We talk about digitalization.
I think this is an answer that could be multiple ways of answering it. You can say a simple, you can say no paper in the company. I want to see everything digital, no Excel spreadsheet. Everything has to operate by itself. I mean, again, we said that every organization, it's a family on its own, has its own rules. You can figure out whatever you want. You want to do your MRPs, your waterfall analysis. It has to be all done, communicating with the ADI is part of, another digitization. So there's a lot of answers to that question.
There's a lot, yeah.
A lot of answers.
Anyway, the poll, yeah.
Yeah. Let me share the results of the poll whilst I was stalling for time there. So I think, yeah, stakeholders, it seems to be the constant challenge. You think that we would be really good at managing stakeholders, but there's that appetite for more ideas, greater ways to make sure that stakeholders are aligned to what procurement is working on, or vice versa, that procurement's aligned to what stakeholders are trying to achieve. Thank you for those.
Yeah. So if we look at that, the top one was winning over stakeholders. The second was around training and empowering talent to support procurement transformation. I think that leads us nicely into the last and final topic in our last few minutes that we've got. So Andre, maybe I'll start with you, right? So I think we're agreed, you alluded to that when we started this conversation about talent and the need for those sort of skill sets and capabilities. Where do you think, given, I'm going to ask you, put you a little bit on the spot. Given where procurement is today, and given all the technology that's there, given the tools that are now available to procurement, and where procurement is expected to go, which is pretty significant transformation, let's say 10 years from now, where do you think procurement teams are today in their readiness for that in the future? It's a bit of a broad question, and be interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that the world is changing really fast, right? There's no doubt about that, right? And not only in procurement, I think that there's the changes happening everywhere, and I don't know if everybody's prepared, right? Some aspects that I think, some of the skill sets that are going to be really valuable in the future, I think that many people do have. For example, stakeholder management, right? So since you're going to have more time because you won't have to work with repetitive tasks, operational tasks, you'll have more time to do that. Sorry. We do have, of course, a lot of people who do have this skill, but on the other hand, over the last years, we saw a lot of more and more risk management coming up, right? The world is becoming much more complex. You have geopolitical challenges that we're facing at the moment. We had a pandemic a few years ago. We have social media coming. So there's much more risk around to the enterprise. And I think that for many people in procurement, we were not paying so much attention on that. So I think there's a clear gap here. Also on data analytics, it's when you talk to a data scientist, it's not something simple. So there's a huge gap between the top management and most of the managers and a data scientist. So it's really, it's hard to find people who can translate what a data scientist is saying, which is very technical, translate that into a business language, right? And how to make it happen and really take advantage of what a data scientist can deliver. So I think that there's a lot that has changed and is changing over the past years, and some skill sets will have to be developed. And I'm not seeing so many people yet prepared for that. It's really hard to find the right professionals to cover that will cover these gaps, because things are changing really fast.
Yeah, I think that is actually one of the most urgent needs in the procurement world today, in terms of getting folks ready for the kind of changes and the changes that it's going to mean for their roles specifically. And actually, I think this came up on one of our last webinars, is whether some of those roles will even exist in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and what does it all mean? Anastasio, you agree? Does that resonate with you?
I think, let me say, I mean, we have a generational gap within the procurement organization, archetype of employees. I think as AI, again, AI is a tool. We have to interpret the outcomes, and you need to have sound decision, business mindset, going back to the basics. And, we need to, I always said, give me an individual who is keen to learn, knowledgeable about different elements within the microeconomics, microeconomics, understandable world politics and everything, and the thirst of learning. And that I can teach in procurement versus the other way around. So it's a very important element that I think right now to do a skill set, we're in transitional period. To do a skill set assessment to retool people, it's going to be difficult in certain areas. I've seen it in recent examples of my workplace. You're bringing people from 1970 into a new digital environment. Then even if you do change management, you do all those cultural training, but if the mindset is not there, it's like bringing my grandpa and put him to a Tesla to drive. It's a different there. So it's very important to have a good knowledge base and the third of knowledge within a procurement professional to be able to, because what we need eventually, yes, AI will take over. We're going to do all the biddings and all the SRMs and what have you. But in the end, it's a human function. It's a human. If I don't like you, you're not going to like me. I'm not going to do business with you, even though you give me the best cost. It's because
totally agree, Anastasio. It's procurement is a relationship area, right? It's a relationship, internal and external, right? You have to talk to your suppliers, you have to build relationships with your suppliers, and you have to build relationships internally in order, again, to add value, to understand what your stakeholder wants, and so on. So it is a super relationship area, and that's something that with this new technology, it will become even more a relationship area, in my view.
Yeah, I think it's pushing the procurement practitioner to elevate themselves in terms of the kinds of skills that they need to have to be able to be successful. And those skills ultimately push you closer to the customer, right? Internal customer, as well as the external customer, which means you have to have I'll use this carefully, like a higher order set of skills to be able to engage with those folks, right? Which is a lot of these aspects. Yeah, Anastasio, please.
We've seen this example, team here, when we had the COVID with supply chain disruption. Is we had to rely on relationship that was developed between the supplier and the customer. and they can put you and feed you in certain raw material or X, Y, and Z, whatever you needed. It's all because of, they had that relationship. So the issue is, I think I go back to my beginning opening of the answer, is the relational gap. The current generation now, they're fixed on the digital, answering relationship and stuff, the social media. And in the end, it's about managing people and going to visiting their facility, understanding capability, capacity, bandwidth, and all that stuff. And it has to be done basically on a dinner, on a meeting, face-to-face, warmth.
People still have a relevance. It's good to have. Graham, not to crunch you, we have literally 3 minutes and we got to wrap up in that time, but thoughts on the
I would say
resonate?
We've very recently done some benchmarking on this, and we had almost 200 category managers. Relationship was number one, but also change management. And we probably would talk about that more detail if we had time, but the ability to manage change is almost the core skill that procurement needs, because it is constant change, but you need to balance that with the relationships.
Yeah. So look, I think those are great ideas, great themes. I think we've touched on a lot of, I made a bunch of notes as we went through this. We're a relationship business. It's about people at the end of the day. When we think about digital, we got to think about how do we drive better outcomes, right? In terms of how we get to the right answer. And that may not be the traditional way that we built procurement organizations. It's important to take the big picture view, start with the corporate strategy and cascade that down, and be very explicit in terms of not only the objectives, but the incentives that we're going to give people. Can't have one set of objectives and incent on a different set of objectives. Organizations have their own personas. You cannot have copy and paste solutions. And that's a great point. ROI, of course, qualitative and quantitative. Think of the hard benefits, but the soft benefits as well. And then the one other point that I'll flag here that I thought was really good is, at the end of the day, you can teach people, I'm going to paraphrase, teach people the hard skills, the technical skills, but if you don't have the soft capability, the thirst for learning, you're really not going to be able to move forward, right? That's foundational to be able to do that. So some themes and wrap up that we had. Do we have I don't think we have any time for questions.
We haven't. No, we got seconds.
All right. Okay. So we're right on time. Apologies, as always. I say this every single time. We never get to Q&A, but I think we have some good conversation. We've come up with some good themes. We will take a look at the questions, post this session, and where it makes sense, we'll come back with specific answers and thoughts. But thank you, Andre, Anastasio, Graham, as always, for being part of this panel. It was a great conversation. And thank you to everybody attending, and especially everybody attending our 10th webinar. So we'll look forward to seeing you on the next webinar in a few months' time. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.